If you have ever looked at your investment account after months of doing the right thing and thought, this is pointless, I want to tell you something that may save you years. You are not broken, you are not behind, and you are not alone. You are standing in the most dangerous stage of compounding, not because your returns are terrible, because the scoreboard is lying to your brain. That is the real problem. The first stage of compounding does not feel like growth. It feels like doubt. It feels like pouring water into sand and watching the surface swallow everything without giving anything back. It feels like discipline without applause. It feels like being told that the miracle is happening while the screen in front of you insists that nothing meaningful is happening at all. That is why so many people quit. Not because they are lazy, not because they lack character, not because they were never meant to build wealth. They quit because the early stage of compounding violates the emotional rules people were trained to expect from effort. The ordinary brain wants a straight bargain. I work, I see something happen, I train, I improve, I save. The number grows. That is how people expect life to behave. Compounding does not pay on that schedule. Compounding pays like an ambush, quietly, slowly, disrespectfully at first, then all at once. It starts behaving as though a second invisible worker joined the room. That is why I want to talk about what I think is one of the most useful mental models an ordinary investor can carry. Not a formula, not a guarantee, not a shiny trick built for social media. A patience model, a way of seeing the journey so you stop insulting yourself in the exact chapter where most people destroy the ending. The model is simple. I call it the 8-4-3 rule. I did not invent it because I needed another slogan. I use it because it describes a truth most people never learn in time. The experience of compounding tends to arrive in three emotional lives. First, it feels dead. Then it feels encouraging. Then it starts feeling strange. Not because the mathematics changed, because the weight of the accumulated capital finally changed the experience. Most people never reach the strange part. They leave during the dead part. And that is the whole tragedy. Let me explain it the way I wish someone had explained it to me when I was very young. When I was a boy, I was fascinated by money because money seemed to me like one of the few things in the world that could keep working while a person slept. That was an intoxicating idea. Most people live by labor alone. They give a day, they receive a day, they give a month, they receive a month. They never fully escape the equation. I wanted to know whether capital could become a kind of employee. It can. But there is something cruel in the early phase that nobody talks about honestly enough. At the beginning, your capital is too small to feel powerful. The numbers do not move in emotionally satisfying ways. Even when the percentage return is perfectly respectable, the actual dollars look embarrassing. And because the actual dollars look embarrassing, the investor makes the oldest mistake in the book. He concludes that the process itself must not work. That is wrong. The process works, the account just does not yet carry enough mass for the result to feel meaningful. That distinction matters enormously. I want to give you a person to hold in your mind because people understand stories better than lectures. So think of a man named Harry, not a finance celebrity, not a hedge fund prodigy, not some boy genius on the internet showing strangers a screenshot and calling it freedom. Harry works the front desk at a mid-range hotel, rotating shifts. Different sleep schedule every week. Some mornings feel like midnight. Some nights feel like punishment. He takes home about $3,379 a month. He shares a cramped two-bedroom with a roommate. He drinks too much vending machine coffee because he is tired. And the night shift convinces people that poor choices are small choices. He keeps promising himself that he will start taking money seriously when life settles down. Life never settles down. That is one of the first truths I want people to understand. The calm month people are waiting for often never comes. There is always something, a bill, a repair, a family issue, a lonely spell, a weak paycheck, a market dip, a political panic, a fear that maybe you should wait until things feel less uncertain. If you build your financial life on the fantasy of a clear runway, you may never leave the ground. Harry tried the usual motivational nonsense. He watched people online talking about freedom. He downloaded the apps. He looked at the clean little charts. He told himself he would be consistent now. Then the market dipped, or his balance looked pathetic, or his checking account got squeezed, and the same sentence returned. What is the point? That sentence kills more wealth than recessions do, because the problem is not the market. The problem is that the investor is demanding emotional proof from a machine that does not pay early enough to satisfy him. That is why I prefer systems over inspiration. Inspiration is unreliable. The person who needs to feel inspired before he contributes is building his future on weather. Weather is not a strategy. Harry's first breakthrough was not choosing a stock. It was understanding what he was even trying to own. People make compounding harder than it is because they imagine it must begin with a perfect choice, the perfect company, the perfect entry point, the perfect app, the perfect strategy. All this perfectionism is just fear wearing a better tie. You do not need the perfect song. You need the playlist. That is what a broad index fund really is. Not a mystery, not a monster, not some abstract financial device for people in suits. A basket, a playlist. Instead of betting your future on one company, one story, one management team, you are buying a broad collection of productive businesses. Some will thrive, some will shrink, some will fail. New leaders emerge, old leaders fade. The economy shifts, adapts, invents, and replaces. The playlist keeps playing. That is a much saner thing to own than your own hopes about one miraculous ticker. The market from up close is noisy and emotional. The market from far away is an ocean. The waves are chaotic, the direction over a long time is not. That is what Harry had to understand first. Not because understanding it made the numbers bigger immediately, because it made the pain interpretable. There is a world of difference between pain that feels random and pain that feels like part of the design. The second breakthrough came when he stopped expecting the early years to look impressive. This is where the 8-4-3 rule begins to matter. The first 8 years are not the years where compounding makes you feel rich. They are the years where the engine is built. That sentence will sound small until you really think about it. An engine is not supposed to be admired because it is already fast while it is still being assembled. The point is not speed yet. The point is the machine. Most investors judge the first years of compounding the way a fool judges an engine. They want to see the car already moving fast before the motor has even been installed correctly. Then they call the machine useless and walk away. I have seen this in investing, and I have seen it in business. A company starts small, reinvests heavily, and shows little visible reward in the beginning. The ignorant observer says it is not working. The patient observer asks whether the economics are being installed correctly. Margin, discipline, product quality, repetition, cost control, retention, distribution. Those are the engine parts. Compounding works the same way in a household: automatic contributions. Low fees, a broad productive asset base, a repeatable trigger, no panic selling, a reserve to prevent interruptions. Those are the engine parts. Harry needed a trigger because relying on willpower was failing him. This is another place where ordinary people make life too hard. They think discipline must feel noble. It does not. The best discipline often feels mechanical. So Harry built something I admire precisely because it is not glamorous. He called it the key card rule. Every time he clocked out of the hotel, he held his employee key card in his hand for 10 seconds and asked a single question: did I buy my future today? Not, did I feel motivated? Not, did the market look attractive? Not, am I in the mood to be a disciplined adult after dealing with irritated travelers and a broken lobby printer? One question: did I buy my future today? If the answer was no, there was no moral sermon, no guilt spiral, no dramatic self-condemnation. He simply created a small buying action tied to the moment, sometimes $37, sometimes $51, sometimes $29 amounts. So small most people would laugh at them. That is exactly why it worked. It did not require a perfect month. It required a repeatable moment. People keep trying to solve long-term wealth with intensity. The solution is usually rhythm. This is one reason I have always liked automatic investing. The future should not depend on the mood you are in on a Tuesday. It should not depend on whether your manager irritated you, whether the market is red, whether you had a bad weekend, or whether some idiot on television is talking about a crash. The money should move. That is what systems do. They protect your future from the temporary versions of yourself. Now, the third breakthrough Harry had was the one that most investors still miss. He stopped tracking dollars first, he tracked shares. This looks trivial to the outsider and changes everything for the person actually trying to build. Dollars swing, shares stack. A falling market makes the dollar value look weak. The same falling market may be allowing you to buy more ownership for the same contribution. If you only stare at the dollar number, you begin feeling poorer during periods when you are actually accumulating ownership more efficiently. That is a terrible scoreboard. It tells the wrong emotional story. So Harry wrote down one number physically every week. Not the account value, the share count. He taped it inside his closet door because he wanted to see the only number that mattered in the early stage. How much of the productive machine he owned. That is a far better measure of early progress than the market value of the position. The early years of compounding are not about visible growth. They are about accumulation. That is a completely different goal. If you do not understand that, you will insult yourself in the exact stage where the structure is working properly. Let us make this concrete. Suppose Harry begins with zero invested and manages to average about $237 a month into his index fund. Not every month. Average. Some months are weak, some are stronger. That distinction matters because people love unrealistic precision. Real lives do not behave like spreadsheets. Cars break, shifts change, roommates move out, medical copays appear. What matters is not perfection. What matters is protecting the streak. After a year, he may have put in around $2,844. That does not feel like a transformation after 3 years. He still may not feel dramatically different in daily life. That is where many people get poisoned by their own expectations. They think if 3 years did not change everything, then perhaps 15 will not either. That is one of the dumbest conclusions in finance, and one of the most common. 3 years in the early stage proves almost nothing emotionally because the base is still small. This is what people do not understand. The first years are not a referendum on the worth of compounding. They are the assembly phase. That is why the 8-4-3 rule is so useful. It tells you not to expect the wrong emotional payoff from the wrong period. The first 8 years are not mainly about getting rich. They are about becoming unbreakable. That is the phrase I want you to remember. Unbreakable, the real enemy in the early stage, is not low return. It is interruption. People start, then stop, then restart, then panic, then cash out, then come back after markets recover, then get disappointed again. They do not lose because the market betrayed them. They lose because the process kept getting reset. Resetting is the true catastrophe. This is why I care so much about anti-quitting mechanisms. The person who stays in the game long enough is already miles ahead of the person who keeps demanding emotional entertainment from a long-term machine. Harry understood this. He knew the danger was not only market volatility. The danger was himself in a loud moment, so he created another little device that sounds childish and works beautifully. He made an agreement with his roommate. If he panicked, sold out of his index fund during a drawdown, he owed the roommate $43 immediately. Not next month, not theoretically that day. A ridiculous little fine. That is what I like about it. It was small enough to be realistic and annoying enough to make quitting feel expensive in the moment. When the market dipped and the primitive emotional question began forming, should I just get out and wait for things to settle? He had a second question ready. Do I want to pay $43 to be emotional? That is not a grand philosophical framework. It is better. It is operational. And operational is where long-term success lives. There is a reason I admire simple structures in business too. A simple good system beats a brilliant system nobody can execute. The same is true in personal finance. People worship sophistication too much. I prefer something repeatable. Now, let me tell you about the moment that matters more than most people realize. Harry's car needed repairs, not cosmetic repairs, not the kind people delay because they are annoying but survivable. Real repairs. The mechanic quoted $979. Harry stared at the number the way ordinary people stare at numbers when the number seems to carry an accusation inside it. He could have sold some investments. Many do. That is the exact moment where the quiet death of compounding often begins. Not in a dramatic panic and a practical little emergency. The investor tells himself, this is reasonable, just this once. I need the money. I will build it back later. Sometimes he does. Often he has taught himself something much more dangerous. That the future account is a checking account with better branding. Harry did not sell. He took extra shifts for 2 weeks and paid for the repair without touching the share count. The importance of that moment cannot be overstated, because what he protected was not only the account balance, he protected his identity as a person who does not cash out the future for a present inconvenience unless he absolutely must. That is a very valuable identity. Most of wealth is behavioral. People keep trying to solve it with prediction. Prediction is overrated. Behavior is underrated. Now we reach the emotional handoff point. This is where the 8-4-3 rule earns its name. The first 8 years are the engine-building years. Then comes roughly the next 4-year phase, where something psychologically important begins to happen. Your contributions and your returns begin working more like teammates than strangers. This is not yet the surreal phase, but it is the first phase where the account stops looking like a container of deposits and starts looking like a living system. Small market moves that once barely registered begin showing up in more meaningful ways. A strong month may add more than one of your ordinary contributions that changes the feel of the process. Now here is the danger. This is the phase where many people begin giving themselves too much credit. They say, now I understand the market. The market is not rewarding your newfound brilliance. It is rewarding your survival. You stayed. That is different. I have seen entire generations confuse compounding with genius because the later phase finally made the numbers look exciting. If you misread that, you do two stupid things at once. You become arrogant and you underestimate the role of boring repetition. Harry did not do that. He remained boring. I say that as praise. Boring is one of the most financially underrated adjectives in the English language. Boring budgets, boring investing, boring asset allocation, boring systems, boring routines, boring businesses with durable economics. Boring is what compounds while other people are trying to feel important. Harry kept buying the playlist, he kept tracking shares, he kept using the key card trigger, and because he stayed boring, the process finally had enough time to become visible. At around a little over 7 years of consistent investing, his total contributions were roughly $21,311, and the account stood around $32,973. That means the account itself had produced about $11,662 beyond what he personally put in. Now, some people will say that is not life-changing money. They are right in the shallow sense and badly wrong in the deeper sense. The deep change is not just the amount. It is what the amount proves. It proves the machine works. It proves the investor can stay. It proves the person is no longer merely putting money aside. He is now working beside an employee called capital. That is the handoff. That is the psychological turning point. The source material calls this the 70% moment, meaning the moment where the investor finally understands that the whole process was never about watching the first phase look exciting. It was about staying in long enough to reach the point where your money begins contributing meaningfully to the work. I think that framing is excellent. Content reference OA site. 1 FE index, FE 1 FE, that is exactly what most people miss when they quit in year 2, year 3, year 5, or year 6. They think they are leaving a boring system. They are actually leaving right before the job handoff. That is why quitting at that stage is so expensive. It is not only stopping, it is walking away just as the machine was finally learning your name. Now let me say something about the final 3 years in the 843 rule. These are the years where compounding starts feeling strange. Not because the returns are supernatural, because the size is, you are still contributing. Of course you are. But now the returns begin arriving in chunks that feel emotionally disproportionate to your old contributions. A decent month in the market can add more than what once felt like a serious amount of sacrifice. That is when compounding starts changing from an act of faith into an observed phenomenon. And it is also when the investor must be careful not to become stupid in a new way. The early temptation was quitting because it felt too slow. The late temptation is overconfidence because it no longer feels slow. That is why the structure must remain boring all the way through. People think the late stage allows them to start gambling because now they have momentum. The late stage demands even more respect because now the amounts are real. A person can blow up 10 years of good behavior by suddenly deciding that the machine was too slow and he now deserves acceleration. That is how many investors turn a beautiful compounding story into a cautionary tale. I have always preferred letting the machine do the extraordinary thing rather than trying to force extraordinary behavior onto the machine. If you own productive assets at low cost, keep adding, keep fees microscopic, avoid panic, avoid ego, and allow time to do its work. The results eventually begin looking miraculous to people who do not understand how boring the process was. That is what I want for people. Not a lottery ticket, a process that becomes a surprise later. So if you are listening to me and thinking this all sounds simple, good simple is not the enemy. Simple, repeated long enough, is where real wealth lives. Here is how I would translate all this into something usable. First, pick a broad, productive asset you can actually hold. For most ordinary investors, a very low-cost broad market index fund is enough. A total market fund, an SP 500 fund. Something designed to let you own the productive engine rather than guess one heroic name. Second, stop using your paycheck as your only investing trigger. Paychecks are emotionally noisy. Rent, groceries, fuel, school, bills, and little emergencies all gather around payday like beggars around a warm kitchen. If investing only happens when the month feels generous, it will not happen often enough. Tie investing to a life trigger you cannot avoid. The key card, your commute home, your lunch break, brushing your teeth, anything stable enough to become identity. Third, track the right thing in the beginning. Track share count, ownership count, contribution streak. The scoreboard should tell the truth in the early phase. The truth is not that your account exploded. The truth is that your ownership increased. Fourth, prepare anti-quitting mechanisms. A penalty, a rule, a conversation with someone who knows your plan, something that makes interruption more costly than boredom. Fifth, tell yourself the truth about the first 8 years. You are not behind. You are building the engine once you finally say that sentence. Honestly, a lot of anxiety dies. People want to feel rewarded immediately. That is what ruins them. The real edge is not early reward, it is accurate expectation. Accurate expectations create emotional endurance, and emotional endurance is how ordinary people cross from saving into compounding. Now, because I know how minds work, let me answer the objection some people will feel. What if the market has a terrible decade? What if returns are lower? What if history does not repeat exactly all fair questions, and still the answer remains the same? The person contributing regularly into productive assets at low cost, while protecting behavior and time, is in a better position than the person doing nothing, jumping in and out, or waiting for a future level of confidence that never comes. The exact return path may vary, the principle does not. Your money cannot help you if you never give it enough time, enough consistency, and enough space to begin helping. That is why I think the early stage of compounding should be treated almost like military training, not exciting, not visible, not glamorous. It is the phase where the real work is identity work. Are you the kind of person who buys the future even when the present is loud? Are you the kind of person who protects the share count during ordinary inconvenience? Are you the kind of person who can stay boring in a world that rewards novelty? That is the game. The dollars come later, the person is built first, and that may be the deepest truth in the whole subject. Compounding is not only building an account, it is building an investor. If you become the sort of person who can survive the first stage, then the later stages become available. If you cannot, they never do. The math will not rescue a weak process. The market will not compensate you for leaving early. The engine cannot run if you keep taking it apart. So when you are 287 days in, or 511 days in, or 4 years in, and the number on the screen still feels offensively small relative to your effort, remember this: that feeling is not the proof that compounding is broken. It is the proof that you have entered the chapter where most people disappear, stay long enough, and the chapter ends. Leave early, and you never discover what the chapter was for. That is the choice. Not whether compounding works, whether you will remain in the room long enough to let it reveal itself.